You can order this figure and more directly from Safari's website. Link is in the description of this video. And don't forget to use my special coupon code DinoScream to save 15% off your order. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Safari Limited review. Today we're taking a look at their new Daspletosaurus. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Safari for sending this figure out along with the other 2021 Dinosaur releases out to me to review. So getting back to this Daspletosaurus, this was my most anticipated release from Safari this year. I was so overjoyed when they announced that they were finally doing a Daspletosaurus. It's a species of dinosaur I've been waiting a long time for a good representation of, and this figure definitely lives up to my expectations. So let's get this figure up on the turntable and jump into this review. So let's start with a nice 360-degree view of the Daspletosaurus. This is a beautiful looking figure. It's sculpted in mid-stride with its mouth wide open. Really pulls off the bipedal pose really well. And one thing I noticed about these new figures from Safari, they seem to be cast out of a much tougher and rigid material than older figures. Like if you just play around with the tail and feet, there is literally no give on these figures, which I think will help alleviate some of the warping issues on some of the other bipedal older figures that were made out of like a softer plastic, so you really won't have to worry about this figure, legs warping over time. But on the downside, because the material is so rigid, if you're being a little rough with your figures, you will snap off toes and arms. The color scheme is also really nice. Very simple yet effective. The main body is a bright yellow color, and then you have olive green markings along the top of the body. You got some stripes along the legs and tail. When I first saw the promotional images, the green coloration was a little bit brighter. It kind of reminded me of the old Dino Riders T-Rex from the animated series. I'm just a sucker for like 80s dinosaur nostalgia. And that's part of the reason that this figure also appeals to me. Just reminds me of that old Dino Riders T-Rex. But all in all, I think this is a beautiful, beautiful looking figure. So let's just do a couple quick measurements. This figure is just about 9.5 inches long from the tip of the tail to the tip of the snout and just about 4 inches tall. So Daspletosaurus in real life was between 26 and 30 feet long. So with those measurements, I'll put this figure in the 132 to the 137 scale range. So if you collect 135 scale figures, this figure is going to fit perfectly in your collection. So let's zoom in and take a look at some of the finer details on this figure, starting with this beautiful head sculpt. Now this figure is sculpted by Doug Watson. He does a lot of figures for Safari. And one thing he's very good at, he does not shrink wrap his dinosaur figures. You cannot make out the inorbital fenestra or the orbit on this figure. It's a very fleshed out Daspletosaurus head, and that is very much appreciated by me and a lot of people in the dinosaur toy collecting community. You can see the eye is painted in bright blue with a black pupil. I absolutely love blue eyes on my dinosaur figure. It really makes them pop. You can see the nostril sculpted right here and the ear canal. Teeth are nicely sculpted and picked out with white paint, and you will notice that this figure is sculpted with lips. Now there's always this big argument in the collecting community about lipped and lipless theropods. There is no direct evidence supporting either of those claims right now, so it really doesn't bother me if a figure comes with lips or no lips, as long as the figure looks great. It doesn't bother me until there is actually evidence to support that. So going inside the mouth, you can see the tongue is painted a bright pink with a nice gloss coat to give that wet look. And then turn it over, you get some nice mouth details on the top right here. See if my light will pick it up. You can actually see the nasal passages sculpted in at the back of the throat right there. I absolutely love that attention to detail. Not a lot of my figures have that nasal passages sculpted in, so every time I see it, just makes me feel really happy. Just a sucker for detail like that. And you can see the throat is sculpted really deep. Just the shadow from the light makes it look like that throat goes on forever. And then going down to the neck, you can see the neck is sculpted with a lot of nice muscle detail on here. The scale detail on this figure is very fine and small. One of the problems we see on some figures, the scales are just oversized to really show you that texture. Doug kind of sculpts everything really, really fine. It looks really pleasing. They have a nice touch to them, very tactile feel. You get some large scales picked out here and there. And turn the figure over from the top. You can see it has a nice wide chest, some nice muscle detail over the hips, and a really thick tail base. So you got a lot of nice muscle detail along that tail. Now going down to the body, some nice folds and wrinkles. The forearms are sculpted really, really well. Fun fact about Daspletosaurus, had one of the longest arms of any Tyrannosaur species, and that is beautifully represented on this model. The hand claws are picked out with black paint, and they are a little bit sharper than Safari usually does. Usually they point their claws a little bit, so that's nice to see that we get a little bit more finer detail. Must have something to do with that harder material they're using to sculpt these new figures. Seems like the details are a little bit sharper on these newer figures. Now going down to the hind legs are beautifully sculpted. Going down to the feet, toe claws are nicely sculpted. Now it's a bipedal figure and the toes aren't as splayed as some of Safari's older figures, so that is nice to see. I know on their, what was it, the Concavinator, just the way the toes looked, it was kind of off-putting to me, you know, just to help that figure balance. And turn the figure over, you get some nice detail along the stomach. And then getting right here, we have a beautiful cloaca slit sculpted in, picked out in black paint. On the side of the tail is bright yellow. You get more of that olive green and striping along the tail right here. So all in all, a really nice looking figure. Just love the Dino Rider vibes that this cute little Daspletosaurus gives off. Now my only little nitpick on this figure, I just kind of wish the gum tissue in here was painted in pink. It just looks weird from the side. I'd just like to see a different color in between the upper and lower jaw, just kind of break up all that yellow. It looks very similar to the Safari Chinsosaurus that came out last year. That's my only gripe about this figure. Other than that, I think this figure is just great. So let's move on with some comparisons. Here's the only other Daspletosaurus I have in my collection. It's the collector one, and this figure is sculpted in a resting pose. I do like these unique poses some companies give their figures. I'd like to actually see Safari do some resting dinosaur figures. But all in all, this Daspletosaurus from Collector was not great. It had a really, really derpy looking face. I did not like the way this thing looked. Looks okay from the side, but when you look at it from the front, oof. And next up is the old Safari Hypacrosaurus. Hypacrosaurus is a hadrosaur dinosaur that lived alongside Daspletosaurus, so these two look quite nice next to each other. And next up is the Papagorgosaurus. In some parts of Daspletosaurus's range, it coexisted alongside Gorgosaurus as one of the few instances of large Tyrannosaur species living together in the same environment. And I think these two actually do scale quite nicely with each other. Daspletosaurus is just a little more heavy-bodied than Gorgosaurus. And next up is another dinosaur species that lived alongside Daspletosaurus. Here is the beast of the Mesozoic, Centrosaurus, and I was a little disappointed that we did not get a Ceratopsian figure from Safari this year. I think Safari puts out some of the best Ceratopsian figures in the business, and maybe next year we'll get a in-scale Centrosaurus from Safari to go along with this Daspletosaurus. And next up, here it is with the Safari Limited Triceratops, and this really hammers the point home of how large of an animal Triceratops is. It's almost as tall as the Daspletosaurus. And next up for comparisons, here it is with the incredible looking 2017 Safari Feather T-Rex. Every time I bring this figure out, I say it's the best dinosaur figure Safari has ever done, and these two do scale pretty well with each other. Really tries to point home of what a beast Tyrannosaurus Rex was. And last comparison, here it is with the new PNSO Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I think these two figures look really great next to each other. They scale pretty well with each other, and I just love the fat, muscular, chunky look of the PNSO T-Rex. What a great figure this is. So final thoughts on this new Safari Daspletosaurus. I think this figure is fantastic. It's a species of dinosaur I've been waiting a long time for someone to do a great representation of, and Safari nailed it with this figure. Love the sculpted in pose, pulls off that bipedal pose fantastically. The sculpted in detail are fantastic. Doug Watson always does great work. Yeah, the paint scheme might be a little bit basic for some people, but for me personally, I just like how it reminds me of the Dino Riders T-Rex. So that is another win for this figure. And I just love the blue eyes in this figure. I'm always a sucker for blue eyes on my dinosaur figures. So yeah, I do highly recommend this figure for your collection. I think this is a great representation of Daspletosaurus. Now this figure retails for $14.99, and I'll leave a link to Safari's website in the description if you want to pick this figure up for yourself. And don't forget to use my coupon code DinoScream to save 15% off your order through their website. So that will do it for the review. I do have the rest of Safari's 2021 dinosaur figures to review, so be on the lookout for those reviews in the next coming weeks. And as always, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, show your support by hitting that subscription button just below the video. Each subscription helps out the channel tremendously and is greatly appreciated, and I'll see you guys for the next one.